First of all, thank you for starting this last year. This is the second time, but if you think of quintessential Davos and the World Economic Forum, there can't be a better venue or view than where we are today. So great selection on the hotel. And also appreciate the weather. All right, so I'm going to turn it over and have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll go into some Q&A. We'll start with you, Oliver, and we'll work back this way.
Okay, yeah, Oliver Newbury, I'm the CTSO at Barclays now.
Mike.
Oh, hey, Oliver Newbury. I'm the CTSO at Barclays now. Started as a computer programmer and system engineer working on telecom systems, and then I was around at the time of the UK government's first national cybersecurity strategy, and I was lucky enough to be involved in implementing that with the intelligence and defense community, and then moved through cyber consulting and into the commercial world.
Oh, here.
I have mine. Hi everyone, Greg Day. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. I feel like the most important part of my history is I used to snow ski on the Fifth Circuit, so I'm really disappointed to be inside rather than outside. But in between that, 30 years in cybersecurity, God help me. Everything from supporting the National Crime Agency, Europol, NATO, and anyone I can find that's willing to listen to me.
Can't beat that. I'm Tom Patterson. I'm the Chief Trust Officer for Unisys. Circuitous route. Denise and I were talking earlier about sort of some of the ways we all got here. I'm former U.S. intelligence community. It didn't have anything to do with cyber except using this stuff to stay alive. And I'm alive, so I guess I passed. Then I've been working on the commercial side since then. I was IBM's chief strategist for e-commerce when they got into the internet business. I ran Deloitte's global security and risk business in EMEA for a while. And for the past 5 years, I've joined Unisys, which is one of the largest and oldest critical infrastructure providers around the world, to be their chief trust officer. Around here, you walk around Davos, stay on the promenade, you can't go 2 steps without hearing somebody talk about trust and the importance. It's really gotten into the consciousness of the world's leaders, and that's something that we believe is important going forward.
Gurvinder Ahluwalia, Digital Twin Labs. I'm based in Dallas. I've had a boring career of the last 20-something years. Started out, cut my teeth coming out of grad school, computer science. Also graduate research at UC Berkeley, Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And my first job ended up deploying the second largest TCP IP network of the world, which at that time was on the uptake. Did the internet kind of shift, deploying major e-commerce kind of websites. While you were at IBM, I was at Sun killing IBM.
I remember those days.
Yes, and led the e-business architecture practice. Very, very exciting, wonderful times. And it's so interesting where we are now in a cycle which is probably larger and deeper and enduring, and that is all that we are seeing with cloud, AI, IoT, and blockchain, all of which to some degree or the other are my expertise. In between, spent some time at TI and actually led the team that did the first deployment of embedded Linux on handheld devices, which was a forerunner to what we today call iPad and Android and all these devices. So my current expertise is in blockchain, IoT, cloud, and really the intersection of all these. And then, of course, here to discuss some of the security aspects.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's an honor to be here with you. Tom, I'm going to start with you. So as we talk about building a cyber blueprint program, we talk about building resilience, robust, secure, trusted, safe networks. What do you think that blueprint looks like? And I know you've been working on this with the Cyber Moonshot with the White House. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to open up the discussions here. But first I want to find out, do you still have your Java ring? from Sun?
Oh, no, I moved to IBM later.
Okay.
I did 10 years and finished as a CTO for cloud over there.
All right. And I want one of those suckers. Yeah, no, Robert, I think it's a great way to start the conversation here. I did spend almost all of last year helping to co-author the White House's Cybersecurity Moonshot program, which hopefully after government gets back to work in the U.S. will get operationalized very quickly. But the concept was, we need the internet to work. We need cyberspace to work. So as a nation, as a globe, critical infrastructure is a global issue. Everyone sort of shares the same issues that a company shares. They need that connective tissue to work, to be reliable, to be resilient. And they're losing trust in that, and it's a dangerous race. It's cat and mouse and always chasing our tails. So the White House asked the NSTAC, which is one of the presidential advisory panels that reports directly to the president, to look at this issue, talk to all the right people, think about it for a while, and come back with a recommendation of, is it possible to get ahead of this game? What would have to happen to get ahead of this game over X number of years, over any kind of changes necessary? What could we do? And we're not being prescriptive at all, but we did talk to 35 or so of the world's greatest experts in a wide variety of disciplines: education, grand challenges, privacy, ecosystem development, and of course technology, and put together a result that the 30 core authors of the report generally agreed by the end of last year that we were optimistic, that this was not an impossible task, that given the right set of circumstances, we could actually get out in front of the cyber chasing our tail and make the internet safe and secure for the delivery of critical services, in our case to the American people, but then work as through global norms to make sure that that is available everywhere. And while it sounds fantastic, and there's certainly lots of people already throwing darts at the report. By the way, the report is real and it's unclassified now. If you want to get it, you can either try and find it on the DHS site, or I put it up on my site at unisys.com/moonshot, where it's just an easy pointer to go find it. But I encourage people, whether you're looking at it for your own organization or you're looking at it more for a region or for a sector, to look at some of the findings there. Very optimistic that within 10 years we can get ahead of it, and yet at the same time, a lot of risks out there, a lot of bad things happening if we don't make a lot of significant hard choices today. That's one of the reasons I came here to Davos this year, was I really do think people need to start thinking seriously about making these hard choices, not waiting for the next disaster.
I want to go over to you, Oliver. Cybersecurity professional, risk officer, also technical background. The challenges of running operations 24/7, and then when you have disruption, how do you manage that? And also keeping customers happy and the board and the CEO.
With some difficulty, but I think you can't get lost in the day-to-day operations. I think that's the thing. Otherwise, you can end up. And there was a great quote earlier, I think, from Jacques about military preparing for yesterday's war. So I think if you get caught up in the day-to-day, ultimately you can end up blindsided, and then you end up in a very negative spiral of always chasing your tail because you're not getting ahead of the threat. You're not actually trying to get out in front. So whilst we obviously set ourselves up operationally to be able to cope with everything we see, I think that the most important bit is making sure you have a real handle on what's coming next so you can be better prepared. And I think in terms of a blueprint for a cyber program, I think innovation needs to underpin it a lot more, and kind of staying on top of trends and where they're going. Otherwise, you end up sort of getting caught out, and that's when the management of the day-to-day operations becomes just kind of impossible to scale. I think just sort of drawing out one of those potentially disruptive trends from both a kind of an attack and a defense point of view. I think AI, as an example, as more and more systems become dependent on quote-unquote AI, and I saw a great example of an online bookseller who there was a book for purchase, it had run out of print, and suddenly it got put on a course for a major university, and the demand spiked, and the pricing algorithm that had been developed using machine learning and AI had this book at like, you know, £25,000, 30,000, 500,000 pounds. And when they went to the vendor, none of them could explain why the price had hiked so much, because the sophistication of the machine learning, the AI, meant that no human could actually verify how you got there. And so I think from a threat point of view, we talk a lot about confidentiality of data and availability, but I think integrity is going to become a lot more important. If you can't really understand how your systems are working in the age of machine learning, how are you really going to know that someone's not manipulating them behind the scenes? So I think it's worrying about that sort of thing. And then just flipping it back on its head, I think we should employ AI and techniques like it a lot more to help us manage day-to-day operations. I still think at the moment we flog kind of to other points raised, the limited human capital we have kind of too much. There's too much manual effort in cybersecurity. So I think we need to get to a place where we have this sort of more autonomic security approach, a bit more like the human brain, where we're relying on kind of machines and computing to handle a lot of the day-to-day grind, sense and respond to things in real time, and then focus our people up on sort of innovation, red teaming, and kind of investigating the human side of cybersecurity where we're best in terms of our creativity. I think that's the kind of future model for how you scale, to your original question.
So I want to go to you, Greg. So Oliver's protecting the integrity of his network, his brand, shareholder value. As a product and service provider to help protect his environment, how do you view the blueprint for the future?
So I think there's a phrase that we all have to get used to using, which is scalable sustainability of our cybersecurity. And just to kind of maybe put a couple of facts behind this today, it was an event last year with about 4,000 executives and board members, and they all highlighted they felt that the IT teams were moving too slow. 72% said, if we are going to digitally transform, we've got to be faster than we are today. And it was an interesting kind of eureka moment for me, because I thought, if IT is being pushed to move faster, what does that mean to the security teams that have got to enable the IT teams? And so we went out and we surveyed them, and what we found was 68% of CISOs already said, whoa, you know, it's moving too fast, we can't put the brakes on, but I'm worried about you moving it even faster. And so the simple reality, what we found, some outcomes of this is, today our world continues to grow and evolve at such pace. Only 23% of organizations, if another Petra or WannaCry comes out tomorrow, would actually be able to understand enough of their estate to understand the risk, the implication, and where they need to go do something. And scarily, only 12% could actually action it. So we have to think about, how do we build in sustainable growth to what we're doing? And I kind of come back to the fundamentals of people, process, technology. And if I start with the people part, I look at, if you've not seen it, one of the great challenges going on last year was XPRIZE had this mission of who could develop a tricorder to diagnose basic medical conditions. And this prize, $10 million, went to a company late last year that basically built a number of wearables that would then gather data from the human body, use AI to be able to diagnose 13 fundamental conditions. And why is that important to us in cybersecurity? I think most of our people are tied up in doing fundamental, repetitive, laborious work. So we have to look and go, how do we free them up to function on the things they should be doing, the more sophisticated things? Then I look at the process part, and Agile, DevOps, and we're moving this shift. And I see organizations that buy cloud compute on a daily basis, but are still buying cybersecurity on a multi-year license basis. So you're going, in one way, I'm locked on a path for multiple years, and on the other side, I've got IT that's ready to turn on a dime. So if we can't shift at that same pace in our processes, how are we going to keep pace with the business? And then I look at technology, and I think I heard AI at least 3 or 4 times today. But actually, if we think about it, AI is based around information. And I would challenge how many of us actually put our information up in the cloud, because AI only works on big data, not just the bad things we see, but also maybe the gray things that might be good or bad, but also the good things to do the benchmarking against that actually might be the bad things. So actually there's some great new technologies coming out but we really have to think about what are the fundamentals we need to leverage them. And for me, that is we need to gather a lot more data. If we're going to gather that data, we're going to think about where can we store so much data. Then actually, if we're going to use all these great new algorithms, unless you're going out and investing a lot of quantum computing, you're going to have to start leveraging cloud compute power to do that. But whilst we've got used to moving business data into the cloud, I don't think we're nearly as comfortable to move security intelligence, our security data, up into that same space.
Scurry, let's go over to you. When we were talking earlier about what do you see are the measures needed to get security out in front? Because if we think about how we've managed security, it's almost like you build a foundation for a house, there's termites, and then you're putting gum and patching. From the ground up, it has to be foundational, right?
Yeah, clearly has to be foundational. So, you know, we are sitting here between you and the drink. So I'll try to make this very practitioner kind of focused. One of the earlier panels, I think this was also the soundbite. How do we put, security has to be put in the front. So there are three things that come to my mind on how security should be put in the front. One, my premise is that I think security has to disrupt itself. The approach to security is not innovative and modern enough. Why do I say that? I just got done running the hackathon for Mercedes-Benz in Turkey. And there was discussion, I think, in the first panel, second panel, you know, so transportation is part of a critical infrastructure, if you may. So what's going to happen to those IoT devices? Here's my field report to all of you from what happened over there. Very nice hackathon, a lot of money, and very luxuriously done, right? Think of the Mercedes brand running a hackathon. They received hundreds of entries and down-selected a few of them who didn't even actually come to the ground, just their synopsis. Then you come to the next level, they had about, I don't know, 75 that actually hacked over 48 hours. And then they had 13 finalists. 13 finalists. My point is this. Out of those 13 finalists, and here we are having a discussion on autonomous vehicles, autonomous driving, and the security risk of it, not one of those hacks was a security hack. They were very, very bright hacks, don't get me wrong. There were hacks on traffic intersection congestion. There were hacks on incentive mechanisms in autonomous driving to ease passage. There were hacks on caravanning of trucks. There were hacks on, everybody's seen these pictures of futuristic cars. There were hacks on how do you remove how do you eliminate a safety belt, a seat belt in autonomous vehicles. So you have this futuristic vehicle, but you still have to do this old, clicking thing. And it made perfect sense. But my point is there wasn't one person over there thinking of security. So how do we've got to have security be approached with a modern way, which leads me to my second point, and that is we have to have hacks around security. We probably, enterprises have, centers of excellences, and one of my messaging to Mercedes and to pretty much every client that I deal with now who asks me for what are the modern methods and techniques to embrace frontier technologies and not get disrupted, but actually embrace the disruption, is I said, get rid of your COEs. Get rid of your center of competencies, whatever you want to call them. They are been there for the last 15 years, and replace them with hackathons, right? Learn how to institutionalize how hackathons are done, invite innovation from the outside, from the inside, and from everywhere. The term, it's a whole area of literature called open innovation. The other way in putting security in the front is design thinking. How many of you know what that is? Okay, great. And design thinking has nothing about technology. It has nothing even about function. One of the simplest artifacts in design thinking is if I'm going to design a product and I'm going through a design thinking drill and exercise, I want to know the behavior of people. I want to know what they feel. I want to know what they think. I want to know what they're going to share about my product and what they're going to do. So those are the 4 quadrants of one of the artifacts. And none of this is about technology. So once you get the behavior and the feelings and the actions and how I share my experience with you, once I've used this technology, use your product, in each of those, underneath each of those quadrants that I just described to you, security would fall into place over there, right? So if I feel insecure in doing this transaction, that's an important feeling which the design and the implementation of that product should incorporate, right? So design thinking, when I go to design thinking, in every design thinking session that you are able to influence, put a security expert to shadow it. Because he or she has to make the very important translation of that discussion and that deliverables into the security pieces of it. The last one I would mention on how do you put security in front of it. We've been here, about 4 hours? And I haven't, sadly enough, heard the word context. I think it's important for anything to happen in context. As Alan Kay, Disney fellow, says, context is worth 120 IQ points. Context is everything, right? AI is based entirely on context. In fact, lack of context is one of AI's current challenges in having, how many of you deal with Siri, maintaining continuity of your conversation with Siri. So my point being, you have to have security in a context. Let me break that down 2 levels for you. One of the elements of security is privacy. One of the elements of security is trust. One of the elements of security is identity. You take the other elements of security. And what's important is the way I look at it is as sluices. And you open these underlying gates and then define what the security should be. Security shouldn't be static. So let me take this into an example. I helped a client build basically the largest global trading of diamonds on a blockchain platform. All right. It's perhaps not the one that you're thinking of a startup, but it's another client. And so if you think of a typical supply chain, and you ask party A to share data with party B, what will they say? First answer is going to be no, right? What did Rod over here 3 panels back say? And where's Rod? I wanted to have a panel-to-panel bake-off with them. And he said, don't share. Don't share unless you absolutely have to. But where is the platform growth and where is the growth in the industry, including the demand, happening? It's happening in platforms, it's happening in networks, right? So you have to, it can't be binary that you share or you don't share, but it has to be in context. What do you share and what is the incentive mechanisms in order for me to share something because I'm getting something in return? So there's more elaboration to what the techniques behind this are. But really, in summary, what I'm describing, Robert, to your question on how do you front-end security with design thinking, with hackathon-styled new innovations, and with applying the right level of context and making security available on sharing and security available on a spectrum as opposed to yes or no.
And part of what you're talking about is culture. So I believe that to build a robust foundation or platform, culture has to be part of that, and the employees that you manage. So Oliver, to you, what have you done and what have been the biggest challenges on educating your employees? Don't click on this. Think about security as a primary thought versus secondary, especially for your DevOps teams that are building product to get out the door fast, with security secondary.
Yeah, I think a couple of different things depending on the segment of employees. I think for the broad population of employees, actually they get quite excited about being part of the cyber defense of the company. I think they find that empowering. So what we've seen around things like our click rate on malicious links is a really, really positive response to what we've put out there in terms of literature. And I think that if you give people that sense of ownership and accountability through creating things like cyber champions locally within departments who are not security professionals, but are within the business, and you use them to kind of help inculcate this culture of like personal accountability, I've seen that work really well. I think it works particularly well in sort of environments like financial services and others, where I guess the employees have a good sort of grip on the importance of controls and regulation. But I've seen that as a positive. I think for IT and technology kind of teams, I think, and for the security team, I think that the big shift is, firstly, for your own team in security, you need to act as an enabler. You can't be the guys slowing down the technology development that the business needs to kind of support where it's going. And so there's a big mindset shift around moving from the sort of policeman to actually helping safely enable the technology teams. I think that's been a big shift, and that plays to your question around, as the technology teams get more agile through things like DevOps and much more fluid, and their ability to release new products to the market to give the business an advantage increases, you really don't want to have a security department that is acting as the single drag factor on that. And so, again, you need to kind of integrate with those teams. That's kind of point one. I think it goes to my earlier comment around automating a lot more of security to kind of Greg's point as well. I think that's important. It goes to the mindset shift of your own security teams and the technology teams understanding that security are there to enable them. I think the final piece I've seen kind of work quite well is where you align incentives with the technology teams. So particularly in large kind of complex organizations, you often have a lot of legacy IT, a lot of technical debt. And if you in security are the only people sort of championing the retirement of that risk, you're not going to get it done as fast as actually if you align incentives and say, if we were to retire this risk, re-engineer this application, this system, it's actually going to enable you to move faster. You're going to be able to release quicker. You're going to be able to write code more cleanly and better. And you can sort of inspire the technology teams to become your allies in re-engineering, re-architecting the technology platforms to not only be more secure, but to be more effective for them to develop out what they're being asked to build from the business.
I want to stay with you, then we'll go over to you, Tom. So the transition of the 21st century CISO to today, which is today, has moved from a cost center, kind of a blue-collar security guy, maybe more technical 10 years ago, where now you're a risk executive, you're a business enabler, you're a driver of the business, you're briefing boards. Some of you are now sitting on board of directors. Someone made a comment earlier about actually the opposite of that. And so what I've seen in the US is the maturity of the CISO into these roles. What do you think has been that driver, in addition, I mean, other than the threat and the risk? The acceptance of the CEO board bringing you in for quarterly meetings, what has driven that?
I think it's the awareness of the kind of boards now about how important it is to the overall agenda of the company. I think that's point one. I think point two is a lot of money is being spent on cybersecurity. And if you think that people are going to pour a lot of money into a back office function that doesn't speak to them and just does whatever they want, then that's kind of naive. So I think that with the increase in money, there's been a commensurate increase in the reporting and the nature of the person in charge of the function, being able to better articulate why that money is a sensible spend in the overall context of the business and is not just going into a number of projects that are hard to understand if you're not a security professional. So I think it's the increase in money and it's the increase in the understanding and education of the board. I mean, I remember that, maybe say like 8 years ago more, the big thing was about consulting companies coming around and telling you, we can help you articulate security to the board. I think now, the board is constantly asking and writing emails going, how are we getting on? So I think that big shift allied with the increase in money are the two main factors why the CISO or the security department has had to evolve.
Naga, you see this in your new role, especially as companies shift their business models from traditional to digital, they seem more connected to the cyber risks in a digital business model. and therefore you get brought in more, you get asked things, and you get to really have a hand in the driving of that whole business, more so in digital business models now than the older traditionals, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, maybe after slowing a couple of projects up right at the end before release, then the technology teams and the digital teams realize that it's better to engage with security early and try and kind of partner with them than it is to fight against it. So I think you're right. And I think everyone realizes, to the kind of point raised, that if you can bake security in, at the design stage, then obviously, like anything, it's just a lot better than if you have to try and retrofit it at the end. And I think, most intelligent kind of technologists and people working on developing new products in an organization have sort of realized that.
Tom, so what have you seen in your experience of the transition of the CISO from what they used to be to what they are today? What has been that biggest driver?
Yeah, I love this question. As one of the few chief trust officers in town, I'm advocating strongly for there to be many more of us. I want to have enough to have a club. I view chief trust officer as sort of the natural next step in that evolution you described, and I'll take it back even further. When I got started in this, it was the secretary that filled out the forms was the security officer, and it just stayed that way for way too long. Now we have great people that understand the technology, but quite often they report to the chief technology officer, and that's where that understanding stops. Getting past that, I think, requires training and experience beyond cyber. It requires an understanding of business. Business school is now almost a required factor to be working with boards and being able to communicate. Not everybody has that. But being able to speak in the right language, to have what I call impedance matching with whoever you're talking to, really, really critical. Understanding new things. I'm taking classes on insurance. I want to understand, is it better for my charges to fix this or insure against it? I don't really know. Insurance has its own little crazy world that is very different and insular. So all that, I think, is coming. But I think a lot of the cyber professionals, security professionals, are starting to get that next step up. I encourage everybody to force the way in to get the right things done. It's life and death for a lot of these companies and organizations out there, and that's worth fighting for.
So I'm hearing context, culture, the importance of trust, and risk executives. Greg, what are you seeing with the customers that you deal with? What are your colleagues seeing in terms of the needs and requirements to help protect their brand and IP and data, et cetera?
So I think it very much ties into all of this. One of the key challenges, I think, for every organization today now is understanding really the very detail of shared responsibilities. And back to Ollie's point, more and more I think CEOs and boards are realizing it impacts their P&L. It could directly impact them legally from a regulatory perspective. But if I start to kind of distill that down, you go down to the next level and go, whether using cloud, now there's a shared responsibility between the architecture and the services. Then I go down the next level to the project team, and you've got a project team that is got a responsibility to that project, and you get into, again, a really interesting bit of going, do I expect that project team, what is their accountability from a security perspective? And I'll give you just two very quick examples, kind of right at the most grassroots level. 85% of public cloud deployments have no outbound firewall rules at all. And so they're now being used for crypto mining. We've seen some significant breaches because their driver is to deliver that business project. Over half of those have no credential management, root credentials with clear text. And so it'd be really easy to say, shame on you, you should be doing all of this. But that's not their goal. And I think that's part of this, is to say, what should that shared responsibility look like? From a technology perspective, it comes back to then, how do we help give visibility to that? I don't think we've been to any organization in the last 24 months where we haven't said, look, we will help you just have a look at what's going on in your public cloud space. And they are horrified between where they thought they were and actually the great projects that have gone on, but they just didn't have visibility because they're happening somewhere in the organization. And then the ability to actually say, okay, which bits do I expect you to do? And which bits do I pass back to the team that isn't actually scalable? And how do they then, through automation, actually put in those right controls and get that balance between what happens at the grassroots, what happens in the security team, what's defined by the central team, and actually what's done by the outsourcer, and what goes up to the board and the business.
Holistic. Great answer. I want to go over to Guri, but I have one more. What percentage of your customers have you seen moving the entire operation into the cloud?
I think the entire operation, I'd have to say probably zero. I think everybody is kind of dipping different level of toes into there. Normally when you say, let's move your cybersecurity into the cloud, I see a look of horror. But I'll give you just one very practical example. A very large international organization, big MPLS network, 60 gateway security controls. And what they were finding is when they were pulling all their security back into their SOC, actually they were starting to denial of service their MPLS network because we gather more and more and more data. And they got to the point of saying, this is crazy. This is all external information. Why am I not storing this in the cloud? And then actually use that as a proof case to do this, and now can do much better analytics as a result of it. And I think every organization is going to hit a tipping point. And the tipping point comes when you start to say, what is it that I'm protecting? At the end of the day, it is business processes and the data behind those. And that tipping point will come when more of those business processes are outside of the business than inside. The security's got to be native to those, and then for it makes no sense to start backhauling all of, if you like, the computational effort inside the business. So at the minute, like everything else, it's a hybrid model, but at some point that hybrid will move to be led from the outside in the cloud rather than the inside.
So I'm seeing a trend with the innovative change agent CISOs. So Clear's entirely in the cloud. Jerry Archer at Sallie Mae Bank moved everything into the cloud. Michael Johnson over at Capital One, they're going there too. So just something to keep an eye on where people are making.
And militaries and intelligence communities have now moved into the cloud.
Right.
So which has gotten a lot of other people to think maybe it's okay for me too now.
I mean, it was a debate. Should we go like 6, 7 years ago, 5 years ago? Oh, people were afraid, but now it's like you're tipping your toe in the water and okay, it's not too cold and not too deep. Let's go. All right, so here's my biggest concern that I see in the world. Well, China. Okay, so the amount of money that China's invested in AI, quantum computing, blockchain, 50-year plan, whatever you want to call it, I haven't seen the U.S. I think we've been out innovated in the last year by the Chinese. So quantum computing, blockchain, AI. Give your take on where you think the U.S. should invest their money. I know you're an expert on blockchain, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think the first panel made a very important point when somebody, I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, around if you were a nuclear scientist in the 1950s, the place for you to work was the US government. And now Apple's cash, on the books, you remember that one. There is clearly a challenge, and I've faced this very acutely and very closely. I've had the privilege of running a one-on-one, very intimate, about 10 people, roundtable with the Lieutenant Governor of California, who's now the Governor of California. And part of the reason was, where from Silicon Valley is the next Facebook coming? Who's the next Google? Who's the next Tesla? And nobody has an answer, which is really what motivated the meeting and to seed it into the mind of the next Governor of California, who previously was the mayor of San Francisco, or the Silicon Valley kind of area right there. So there's clearly a challenge on innovation, but I don't think it should be. I don't look at it really from an expertise standpoint. I don't look at it geographically. I look at it, how do we move the needle on describing and putting in platforms. When we're talking about the Cyber Future Foundation, the platforms of the future are they are behavioral platforms and behavioral assets. They are cognitive platforms and cognitive assets. and they are networked platforms and networked assets, which includes blockchain. And if we look at it from those perspective, I think that's what has to be, and wherever the innovation comes from, companies and clients and everybody has to benefit from it.
Well, gentlemen, I think we're out of time. So, Val, Harold,
Hey, hang on.
Dave.
Let's give these guys one final round of applause. And here's what I want to say. This is the 5th event like this that we've done. This is the 2nd one here in Davos. And I want to say that I think Val has put together the most incredible program, the most incredible group of panelists and facilitators, moderators. It's just incredible. Where's Val? Here it is right there. And Robert has been right there beside us every step of the way as we have developed.
We learn from the best.
Yes, thank you, Robert.